Hey everybody, hope you're doing great today. Let's go ahead and jump into our next part of formal language. In this part, we're going to be looking into some more complications in how sentences are constructed. How do we get to more complicated sentences? Last time, we looked at some basic building blocks of our language, right? We looked at just what is an atomic statement, how are we representing them? The idea is, right, capital letters are kind of our smallest building blocks. These just represent specific things that are either true or false. We never would say one letter equals the light is on and the door is open, right? In order to get something that complicated, the idea is we build it out of these sorts of symbols, right? We would say P is true and Q is true or something like that. Or if P is true, then Q is true. So these symbols give us 5 different ways of augmenting or making more complicated statements. Last time we did look at a little bit of that. We just looked at the simplest way of making more complicated statements, right? We just put the negation on one, or we put a disjunction in between them. But as I alluded to, we can get much more complicated than that. This frame right here is taken straight from your lecture notes, and in there I explain this very carefully and rigorously, what it means when we say we're writing a sentence that makes sense. It comes down to this idea of well-formed formula, what we'll often call just a WOOF, a WFF. And the idea is, sometimes when you write something, it means something, right? Like if I write if C then L, well, based on what we just said over here, that has a meaning. It's saying if it's cold, then the light is on, right? Like that's what my statement here means. But what if I wrote something like this? What if I wrote CL and then let's just say that, right? Even if, right, actually, just to make the point clear, I'll take out the tilde, the negation. I have the same exact symbols, but one of these counts as a legitimate statement, right? One of these has a meaning. This one doesn't have any sort of meaning. It's absolute gibberish. It's nonsensical. It's saying, right? I mean, I can't even start because, like, it's not saying anything, right? Like, I don't know how to interpret when you just put two things together because, like, that's not part of what we do in this language. So the point is that anytime we're trying to think of just what we can write in our language, we can think about anything as just the result of building, right? It all starts with just our atomic propositions, right? So let me write this down. Any statement is just the result of constructing using 3 rules, right? And the 3 rules, let's see if I can find the vertical arrow here. Yep. Are the ones I have just up there. Right. So the idea is just that, and again, like, I don't want to get too bogged down in, like, the technicalities of the rules. I spend a good amount of time explaining this in the lecture notes, so definitely visit those, as you should always be visiting the lecture notes to make sure this is really sinking in. But I want to give you a bit of a different approach, or a different way of saying it, at least, here. The idea is, like, with rule 1, we're just saying, like, start off with your atomic statements, right? So let's start there. Start off with atomic statements. Each one of those counts as a woof. Right? So the point is, if I'm trying to wonder, like, what makes sense, right? If I have a maybe I should go ahead and have a woof bucket. And I will go ahead and put that up top, and then I'll have a gibberish bucket. Right, and so the idea is, let's say I like these things, and I don't like these things. Right, and so we already had one. I'll just put these in individually. So we had if C, then L, something like that. So we said, yeah, no, that makes sense. That's a legitimate statement, right? But then this other statement, or this other string of characters, I should say, that's gibberish. That doesn't mean anything. And so like the idea is these rules are going to tell us, okay, what is it that really works and what is it that counts as gibberish? Okay, and the first thing is that it's telling us all of the individual statements, those are all totally good on their own, right? So I could have C, I could have, well, let me bring this back over here. Let me just copy and paste this. Right? So if I have this just to remind us, that means C, yeah, cool, throw it in the woof pile, right? W, yeah, that on its own, completely a good woof, right? What else? L, yep, you guessed it. It is also a good woof. Let's say L. Right, maybe I'll group these guys together up here. I'm not trying to put too much structure in this, but I'll do all of them. D is good. So D, L, W, C, and R we're missing. So right, rule 1 gives us all of those. That's effectively what rule 1 is giving us, right? It's saying like, yeah, all of your atomic statements, those are perfectly good statements. Those are perfectly good statements to use. This one I haven't actually justified yet, so let me just put both of these on the ground for why they're not good. Okay, so that's just, right, like, that's just the start, right? Like, you were worried about, like, whether or not you were saying something that was gibberish or saying something that made sense. Well, as long as, like, one thing we can be careful on is, as long as you're just saying a single letter, you're safe, right? Like, those all make sense alone, right? That shouldn't be too surprising, because they're just claiming a single thing. But the rule 2 then tells us, right, basically how to build something out of the negation. And essentially, it's just telling us anytime you have something that already works as a well-formed formula, you can just add a negation to it and you've created another well-formed formula, right? So like if I have R, for instance, I know like that's a well-formed formula, then I can just take this and I can add a negation to it, and I know that's also a completely legitimate statement. Now, to be clear, that doesn't mean I know that these are true, right? That is not what we're talking about. Because obviously R can't be both true and false at the same time. What we're talking about is just, does it make sense to say that, right? Like, do I know what, if you gave me this statement, do I know what you're saying? And I do. I know you're telling me it's not raining, right? That's all we mean when we say that something is a well-formed formula. So, right, the idea is if I know one thing is a well-formed formula, I know negating that thing is well-formed, right? So like with all of these, I can add all of them over here with just, right, and I'll just add a little negation on each one. I know all of these guys are also totally good well-formed formula. All right, so this comes with step 2, those guys. So like let's go ahead and maybe make that note. Anytime next we can use our connectives to create endlessly more complicated statements. So in particular, right, we can add a negation to the left of any statement that's already a woof, right? That's what we were just doing there. But then the other part of this, and this is the step 3 part, we could also just combine any 2 statements together, right? We can combine any 2 woofs together using one of these. right? One of our symbols. So like the point is that rule 2 takes care of our negation, rule 3 takes care of the rest of our symbols. And the reason why we handle these separately, right, is just because the negation, we're never combining two things together, right? We're just saying, hey, you gave me a sentence, I can always just tack another negation on the outside of it, and now it's also a sentence. It's just the opposite of the one we started with, right? It's saying this one is not the case. And then rule 3 tells us, okay, now anytime you have complicated statements, well, now you can just put them together, and as long as you're putting them together with one of these 4 operators, well then cool, you've built another statement that still makes sense, right? So the idea is, now what we can do is, with like rule 3, for instance, I'm given things like, so I could say, oops, not only can I say, oh, C is a good one and R is a good one, so I get to, with rule 3, right, not only do I just get to say C is good and R is good, so cool, there's another one. But now notice, like, the point of all this is that it's iterative, right? We can keep building on this, right? So if I have that already in my pile of things that are well-formed formula, now let's think about how these rules work. I can take this one and I can say, okay, now I'm going to use rule 2 and I'm going to say, well, you know what else is a perfectly good statement? Negating that whole thing, right? That's also a good statement, right? Because I took something that was well-formed and I just put a negation on the outside of it, on the left, right? That's the left slash outside, which we'll talk about more in a moment, right? And I can keep doing this, right? I could also say, okay, if this is a well-formed statement, not D, and if this is a well-formed statement, C and R, well then I can just put them together. I can say, all right, well, if both of these are well-formed statements, I'm going to use rule 3 and I'm going to say this is a well-formed statement. Right? And I can put that in there. So the point of all of this is that as we're building, we only ever start with atomic statements. And then all that we ever do is you're either going to just combine those 2 atomic statements with one of these 4 symbols, or take that entire thing and put a negation on the outside, on the left. Right? So as we're doing this, what we've been implicitly using are just these parentheses, right? So like at every stage when I make something bigger, I want to keep track of like, okay, what was the structure that I built from, right? Like I started off with C, and then I had R, and then I put those together, and then, right, I took C and R, and I put that together with not D. Right here. But like the point is that it's really important that I know I'm saying if C and R, then not D, right? And not something like if, so right, this statement is a very different statement. Right? One of these is saying, hey, let me bring back the box. One of them is saying, hey, if it's cold and it's raining, then the door is closed. The other one is saying something very different. It's saying, hey, it's cold outside, and also, just so you know, if it's raining, the door should be closed, or is closed. Right? But the point is, this one is telling us, hey, if it's cold and raining, then the door is not closed, or then the door is not open. This one's saying it's actually cold, and also if it's raining. So the difference between these is, in the first statement, I don't know if it's actually cold. Right? It's telling me, hey, if it's cold and if it's raining, then the door is closed. But in the second statement, it's telling me, no, definitively, it is cold outside. And also, you should know that if it's also raining, then the door is closed. Right? So the way in which we build these statements up is going to change crucially what they actually mean, right? The fact that this statement was built out of first starting with C and putting it together with R and then negating it makes it different from if we started off with not C and put it together with R, right? And we said not C and R, right? Like that's just a different statement. So the point of all this is just to be cognizant of how we build up our statements, how they're constructed. At this point, it might seem just a little bit abstract and technical and like, I don't know why we're looking at the nuts and bolts of these sorts of things. But as we go, we're going to see a lot of what we're going to do relies on, can we see the real structure, the real way in which these statements were constructed in the first place. Okay, I didn't spend a lot of time on the gibberish section, but now we will. So the idea is that anything, so I'll write this down, anything that can't be constructed by these rules is gibberish. Okay, and let me also, I'm going to give this, nope, way too much. Right? So the point is I just gave you all the rules for how to construct something right. And the idea is if we look at any statement or any string of symbols or something, we can ask like, okay, could I potentially even build this out of these rules? Like I can start off with the C, I can start off with L, but the only way I could ever put C and L together is if I put a dot or an or a conditional or a biconditional in between them. Here I didn't put it in between them, I put it to the side. So this sort of thing just, I would never be able to build out of my rules, right? Similarly, right, like we can have a number of different examples. If I had something like denegation, right? Like the rules don't let me do that. The rules tell me anytime, the only way I can ever like add a negation to something is if I put it on the left. That's what it means to negate something. This just doesn't make any sense. Right? Also, if I did something like, if I just had a bunch of parentheses and then just arrow, right? It's all, like, it doesn't make any sense. And one of the ways we can verify, like, we can't build this out of what we had. So there should be something really intuitive about these rules, right? This idea that we start off with just our basic building blocks, and then for the negation, we just tack that onto the side, onto the outside of the entire statement, and that always gives us something new. And then for the other operators, right, we always put it in between them. The reason for this is we call negation a unary predicate, or a unary operator, I should say, right? It attaches to one thing, unity, right? One thing at a time. And then these other ones are what we call binary operators, right? They combine two things at once, right? I didn't spend too much time talking about the parentheses themselves. Oftentimes, dealing with that like safely, it can be just more slow and dry and less enlightening than usually the approach a lot of people already have. Typically, people have a pretty good intuitive approach to how parentheses work. I have, however, very much explained how to work that out in the lecture notes and like how to understand all of these parenthesis things and when you need parentheses and when you don't need parentheses. If any of it doesn't make sense, definitely feel free to reach out. Okay, so the idea here, right, is just that we're trying to get a sense of like, okay, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And generally speaking, just quick recap, we start off with, what at least makes sense is our atomic statements. We can also add a negation onto anything that does make sense, including atomic statements or complicated ones. And then, for any statements that we have, we can always combine them with our binary operators, whether those are atomic things we combine, like right here, or whether they're complicated statements that we combine. And the idea is we just keep getting more and more complicated as we keep putting more and more statements together with our operators. Okay, so now let's just look at a handful of examples just to make sure we're all feeling good about this. I'm using the same word bank as above, though, right? Like we could clearly use a lot of different ones. So let's just get into it, right? These are our first ones that use more than just one symbol, so like it'll be good to, let me add a little bit more to that one. It'll be good to really try to digest these. So just like last time, the point, what I want to emphasize is to be doing this slowly. Some of these, it's not going to matter as much, right? You're going to think like, oh, what's the difference, right? Like this says it's not the case that R or it's not the case that R or C. But like now that we have multiple operators, it's important for us to start to think about, right? Like, well, okay, there's two different ways I might try to understand these. And this is going to be a big thing we'll focus on next time as we get even more and more complicated. Right? So like for this one, am I saying, so let me bring this back down. I'm saying not R or C, right? And so I could think about this in two different ways. Am I saying it's not the case that it's either raining or it's cold? Or am I saying that it's not the case that it's raining or it's cold outside? Right? So we have these two different statements. So there's one statement. And it's not the case that it's raining or so in fact, I'm even going to just change this one so you can see exactly what I'm talking about. So let's think about these two English statements and how they relate to these two logic statements, right? One of them is saying it's not the case that it's either raining or cold, right? It's like somebody just came in and they said, like, hey, it's either raining or it's cold outside, or they're telling you, hey, the weather's going to be bad, and then you say, no, it's not the case that it's either raining or cold. I don't need my jacket, right? Like, that's what this first one means. It's not the case that it's either raining or cold. It's neither raining nor it's cold. Whereas the second one is telling us either it's not the case that it's raining or it's cold, right? Like, hey, if it is raining, it's probably cold, or it is cold, I should say, right? So these are saying two different things. The second one tells us I'm not sure if it's raining or it's cold, but I just know that one of those has to be true. Either it's not raining or it's cold. I'm not sure. Maybe it's not raining or maybe it's cold. I'm not sure which one is true, but one of them has to be true. The second one, or the one on top though, this one is telling us it's not the case that it's either raining or cold. Like it's telling us definitively, no, neither one of those is the case. Right? So the first one is leaving open, right? It's saying, hey, I'm not sure which one is true. Either it's not raining or it's cold. And the first one is saying, no, I'm going to tell you definitively, something is not true, and it's this disjunction. That's the thing that's not true. So as we look at this list of statements here, or this pair of statements, let's try to think of which one matches which, right? Is this one there? Is this one there? And so to do that, to really do this nice and slowly and not just rely on some gut feeling, let's do this very slowly, right? We could go from either direction. We could try to like translate these logic statements into English, or we could start with these English ones and go into logic. Let's do that. So it's not the case that it's either raining or it's cold, right? So let's try to think about, it's not the case that this thing, right, this is a tilde, or this is a negation, but the idea is it's applying to this entire statement here, right? So actually I should do what I was doing last time, and I'll go ahead and keep versions of these statements just below them at least, right? Like I can change that into just a a negation symbol, right? That's all that I'm doing there. I've just replaced that. And now all that I'm going to, and the idea is that, right, like I'm going to put parentheses here because that it's not the case that is applying to the rest of the entire sentence, right? We're saying it's not the case that this entire other thing happens. Actually, I should really just make it's either cold or raining. So now I can think like, okay, so let me translate this part. It's either cold or it's raining. So I know how to do that from last time. I just replace the it's either with an or. And then I have raining or cold on either side, which I know, right? I can substitute those now. Right? And so that's how I get to this statement. So what this statement is saying is it's not the case that this entire clump of a statement is true. Right? So like if we're thinking about how we built it, right? It's like we started off with this disjunction. It's like we started off with saying, hey, either it's raining or it's cold. And then this negation is like saying, no, it's not the case that it's either raining or it's cold. Right? And so like let me go ahead and I'll color code this just slightly. So it's not the case that. So let me just no particular colors or purpose for any of these colors. Right? It's either raining, so either or this, we'll just go ahead and right? And that's where we get this or from. And then of course raining and cold, I don't think I want to, I'll just leave it as the symbols here color coded because I don't want to just overload you with too much color. Hopefully you see the connection between raining and R and cold and C. Right, but like that's the sort of structure we want to start to be picking out of the sentences, right? And notice that that's just very different from the structure down here. Here, we're starting with the either, right? This is what we'll call next week, right? We'll spend more time on this, the main operator, the main connective. Here, the main thing going on is a negation. We're saying it's not the case that some other complicated thing is happening, right? Here we're saying it's either the case that one complicated thing or the other. So, right, like the idea is I'm going to start here with my or, either or, right? And I'm just going to go ahead and this is honestly how I do these statements. I'm just going to put that or down from the start. And I'll do it with parentheses on either side. Because the idea is I know, like, yeah, okay, I have an or, and then there's going to be a left side of the or, and there's going to be a right side of the or, right? So, like, as soon as I notice that my main operator here is an or, I know, like, okay, this is a big either or statement. So I just need to think, what goes on the left side of the or? And I'm just going to say, oh, it's either raining. It's not the case that it's raining, right? That's going to go on the left side of the or. And on the right side, right, is just that guy. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to just zoom in a little bit, right? Now that I have that or thing set up, so now I can just say, okay, what is the left side? It's not the case that. Okay, I know that's supposed to be a tilde or negation. And then, of course, I can just go all the way, and I can just raining is R and cold is C. So this is one of the things I mentioned above. There are certain, like, when it's clear and it's not ambiguous, we don't need the extra parentheses here. So that's why we're able to take these parentheses off, and we still know exactly what this guy means and that it's different from him. Here, we can't take the parentheses off, though, right? Because the parentheses are like wrapping together the R or C and keeping the negation, right, on the outside so that it applies to everything. So the crucial difference between this statement and this statement is that the first one, the negation, is applying to everything. It's saying it's not the case that this disjunction is true. It's not the case that it's either raining or it's cold. This one, that negation is only applying to the are, right? It's saying it's not the case that it's raining or it's cold, right? If it was cold, I wouldn't worry. Like, maybe it also is raining, but like, it's either not the case that it's raining or it's cold, right? So the point of the parentheses is to help us like group together the things as we're building these. So now that we've laid it out, we can see like, okay, looks like this one actually was on the top, right? Whereas this one is on the bottom. Okay, again, I'm going very slow through these. Some of this you might be thinking like, wow, we're dealing with the most simple statements and you're spending so long on them. So like wow, this feels just slow and complicated. But like the idea is just to start us off with some good habits, right? Noticing the difference between these two things is going to be really important as we go, right? Because they're saying very different things. All right, so to see that a little bit more, let's just go ahead and move ourselves in, move on to the rest of these examples. So I will add a little bit of space here, I suppose, and I'll bring this down. Or it's cold. I don't think I need that anymore. Okay, so let's just go ahead and for each one of these, let's just think through what they're actually saying. So now we're looking at some logic to English here. So I did just do it the reverse. But so the idea here is when I'm going the opposite way, all I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and do this again. I'm just going to say, okay, let's start with what we think of as the main operator, right? And that's the thing that's going to be applying or connecting everything else in the sentence, right? So in this case, what I'm saying is two things are true, right? So I'm going to replace that with an and, right? And then on the right, I mean, that one's going to be easy. I can just say the light is on. And on the left, I just have to think, okay, so what is this statement saying? Well, it's saying if R is true, then W is true, right? And really, maybe I should be... try to show you a bit more of the process. I'll just leave this as L for now. Right? And then, right, I'll go ahead and put in, so if it and also the light is on. Right? So, and this might, with all the commas, this might be a little bit harder to see, so maybe I'll say it like, it is raining, well, maybe I'll leave it as the if then for now, just so we can see. But right, like, the idea here is that we're not saying if it's raining, then the ground is wet and the light is on, right? And so this is why I'm trying to think of a better way to phrase this in English. What we're saying is, if it's raining, then the ground is wet. And also, in addition to that rule, the light is on, right? And like, the problem we're facing here is that English is ambiguous, right? Like when I write the sentences in English, like it's not really clear which one I mean. Like if it's raining, does that mean the ground is wet and the light is on? Or is this somehow separate? And that's why we use those parentheses in logic, right? So we can like really group it together so we can know what we're saying. Are you telling me that the light is on definitively and that a wet ground is the result of rain? Or are you telling me that the light is on is a result of it raining, right? Like which one? So to make this, so I mean, this is just how natural language works, right? Like that it's ambiguous in these ways. Oftentimes we'll try to phrase these out a little bit more in a way that makes that structure more clear. But the whole point of this is, right, like the whole point of this ambiguity in English is exactly why we turn to logic, this language. So that way we can be very clear. Okay, you're telling me two things. One, that rain leads to wet ground, and two, that the light is on. So I might try to rephrase this one just slightly, just so to make that more clear, right? It rains. It raining always entails a wet ground, and also the light is on, right? So hopefully that makes it a little bit more clear how it matches this structure. But again, the point is, English is ambiguous, and like it's sloppy, and it's difficult to figure out what do we really mean, right? If this was, like, oftentimes we say these sorts of things, and if this is part of an argument, it becomes really difficult. What does it really mean for me to reject or accept what you're trying to tell me? Okay, so this is saying two things. One, rain leads to wet ground, and the light is on. All right, now let's try to proceed with a little bit more speed, maybe. All right, so here, right, the idea is I have this if-then, right? I see that the arrow is the thing that's connecting everything else in the statement, right? The or is just connecting the D and the R, but the arrow connects the L to this D or R thing, right? So again, I'm going to just start off there. I'm going to say, okay, so then I'm going to say this as an if, L, then D or R, right? And then I can say, all right, well, so if I have that, then I can, now let me do the or. So if L, then either D is true or R is true, right? And now I can go ahead and I can just plug in all of my statements. I can say, okay, so if the light is on, then either the door is open or it is raining outside. Not just it is raining. Right? And again, like, that's hopefully me laying out these steps like this is helpful for you to see. Just like all I'm doing is starting with just like that main symbol, the one that connects everything else. And then I'm just slowly breaking down the rest of the statement, right? Like, okay, that main symbol just is an if-then. So let me just keep everything else as it is and just put it in terms of an if, that left side, then the right side. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the next connective that's a little bit more nested inside. I'm going to say, all right, if it was if L, then D wedge R, well, then, like, okay, let's just spell that out. If L, then either D or R. And then we can just plug in what all these letters actually mean. If the light is on, then either the door is open or it is raining. Right, okay. If you haven't picked up yet, oftentimes we'll try to use something like commas to do the work of parentheses. It's you know, again, English is sloppy, so it's not always a perfect business. All right, finally, the last one from logic to English. Again, I'm going to start with the operator that's furthest on the outside, right? The one that looks at everything else, the one that's connecting the left side to the right side. Here, the dot just connects the R to the C, but it's this double arrow that connects the R and C, that whole thing wrapped up in a pretty parentheses bow with the W on the other side. So here's what I'll say, right? I'll take this guy, and I'll say, okay, so this just means if and only if, right? They only happen at exactly the same time. Okay, so now let's go to the next step. So now let me go inside to see, all right, well, this just means and, right? Like, both of those things are true. So now next step, I can say, all right, well, so let me just plug in. I've gotten all my connectives and operators out of the way. Let me just plug in what all these means. It is raining, and it is cold. It is raining and it is cold. So this is one of those places where just like some cleaning up on English can do us well. So right, like I can say it is raining and cold. If and only if W, right? So W being the ground is wet. Right? So again, we have this idea. We have, like, on the left side, we're saying it's raining and cold if and only if the ground is wet, right? So the main operator is this double arrow, and it's connecting this left side, it's raining and cold, to the right side, the ground is wet. Okay, now let's go back to just doing some English to logic, right? So in all of these, well, except for Okay, so I changed those just slightly. So let's think about some of these. So it's not the case that it is both cold and the door is open. So let's try to think, like, what here do we think is the main operator? We can see that on this first one, right, we have two operators. We have this not, we have this and, like those are both clear, partly because I bolded them. But, right, like, how should we phrase this sentence? So let's think about this. So we could say it's, are we trying, so yeah, how, are we trying to say it's not the case that something? Or are we trying to say, hey, two things are true, and one of those is that it's not the case that, right? Hopefully, right, and again, like a lot of this translation to English is just about can we pick up the meaning? So right, there's we are reliant on intuition to some degree here, but right, like the idea here is that like it's not like we're saying it's not the case that it's cold and the door is open. We're saying it's not the case that both, right? Like, so like this both is telling us that the not is applying to both things. So, right, like the idea is when we translate this sentence, we want to say, yeah, it's not the case that. And that thing is applying, we can think about this as applying to the entire other thing in parentheses, right? It is not the case that, and then we're saying it is both cold and the door is open, right? We're saying it's not the case that this conjunction is true. So here, of course, I can just swap this out for my and then I can say, okay, well, it's cold, and the door is open, so we're good. And I use the right letter. I can bring this down just so we all comfortable. Right? And now let's contrast this with this one. Here, I'm saying something similar. It's not cold, and the door is not open. So here, it's not that I'm saying it's not the case that both things are happening. Here, I'm like the and is the main thing, right? I'm saying two things are true. One, it's not cold. Two, the door is not open. So with this one, right, and actually maybe I should leave the history of this a little bit better, like I was doing above. So for this one, right, we were saying it's not the case, right? So we did, it's not the case that. Right? I won't do absolutely everything there, but. Right? Here, though, we're saying two things are true. It is not cold, and the door is not open. Right? And so now on our next step, we can just, right, we can do our negations. We can say, we can take the not out, and we can just put it right there. We can take the not out. And we can put it right there. Right? And then we can just translate, it is cold. It's just C. The door is open. It's just D. So notice these two things. So this is something we're going to spend, in a few weeks, we're going to spend a lot more time on. These you might think, oh, they're the same thing, right? Like I took math and you just distribute a negative. That is not how it works here. Okay, so like these are very different statements, right? One of them is telling you, no, it is not cold outside and the door is not open. The other one's just telling you both aren't true, right? If I said it's not the case that both the Broncos and the 49ers will win the Super Bowl, that's different from me. That's just saying, like, yeah, they won't share the Super Bowl, right? That's different from me saying, no, the 49ers will lose and the Broncos will lose, right? Like, that's telling me neither one. So this is one of those things that you might think of as intuitive or commonsensical, but is actually really counterintuitive. These are very different statements. And this is one of the reasons why it's going to be so important that we're careful about what we're doing and what we're building, that we know, okay, I'm not saying the same thing here. Right? I see the subtle differences in how these two things have been constructed. One of them is a big negation statement. It's saying something is not true, namely that both of these things will happen. The other one is a big conjunction statement. It's saying two things are true, namely that C is false and otherwise that D is false, right? So this is a much stronger statement here. Okay, so now let's go ahead and keep moving. So if it is raining, then the ground is wet and the door is open. So, I mean, yeah, I think, let me go ahead and, so, I mean, I think like this sentence is, again, like one of those, this is why we're getting away from English in natural language, because it's a bit ambiguous. But like I mentioned above, the existence of this comma is trying to tell us where the main operator is. The problem here is it's not clear if the main operator is this if then or this and. But because we have this comma, I'm inclined to believe that the main operator is really this and. What we're saying is it raining means the ground is wet and also the door is open. Just so you know, like for particular exercises I give you, I won't force you to deal with that sort of ambiguity. But that's often like a thing that will happen. Like you'll be trying to word something out, maybe your own argument, maybe somebody else's argument, maybe in philosophy or science or wherever, and you realize like, oh shoot, I'm not sure exactly what I want to say. I'm not sure which structure I want to say. So like when I give you exercises or something like that, I'll try to make it always very clear which one is the right one. But the point is this ambiguity is just is rife in English and in other natural languages. So here we'll take the comma as a signal to say that the main operator is the and we'll follow that. So we'll just say, right, the main operator is the and, then I'm just going to say, and the door is open, right? So I have a if left side, or I have a left side there, a right side there, right? And then all I do is I take this down, and I say, oh, well, and if then, this is just going to say, it is raining, arrow, the ground is wet, and then the door is open, right? And now I've removed all the connectives I need to, and now I can, right, just come down here, and I can just say, okay, well, this is R, ground is wet, the door is open. Okay, good. So, and just like I alluded to before, when we're not at risk of ambiguity, we can delete these parentheses, and I can do that. Actually, I'll go ahead and leave that as its own line. Okay, so again, the general idea is when there's no risk of ambiguity, we're okay with deleting premises. To really get the hard line, you know, when are we at risk of that sort of thing? Again, that's more clearly splayed out in the lecture notes. I just don't want to take too much time on that sort of thing when it's usually pretty intuitive. But again, reach out if you do have any questions, certainly. All right. So let's go ahead and do this next one. So this next one is similar to the second one, but it's different. Notice here, I don't have that comma, right? So here, I'm not going to treat the or as the main operator. Instead, I'm going to say, oh, well, it sounds like what you're telling me is if the light is on, then either one of these two things is going to happen. So that's how we'll treat this one. So I can say if the light is on, then either of these two things is going to happen. So I'll just substitute this with the conditional arrow. Take that. Okay, got that. And then we do this, right, where we know, okay, that or is just a good old-fashioned or. And then finally, we've got all our connectives out, and so we can just replace it with the symbols. Okay, and again here I can, because the parentheses here don't really need to like wrap anything up. It's still clear. The L is the left side. I can't lose the parentheses on the right side because those parentheses are doing real work, right? They're wrapping that together as an important chunk of the sentence, right? So what we're saying is if the light is on, then either it's raining or the door is open. Okay, I do need, oops. So last but not least, let's go ahead and do this one. So we have if it is raining and cold, or it is raining and cold if and only if the ground is wet, right? So let me make sure. Oh yeah, this is the same as what we had before. So let me change. Okay, I just changed it just slightly, just to make this at least different from the one we did above for the last one, English. But again, we can see, right, like the or here is not connecting everything. It's not saying it's raining or it is cold only if the, right, like it's not saying it is cold if and only if, right? Like it's saying it is raining or cold. That's the left side of this if and only if. And then on the right side we have the ground is not wet, right? Like again, the not doesn't apply to the entire sentence. We're not saying it's not raining or cold or anything like that. It's just applying that small part. So we can group these together on either side, right? And substitute that main operator with that double arrow. And then all we have to do then, right, is go into each side and think like, okay, so this side had an or, it is raining, or it is cold. And then this one had the ground is not wet, so we can just move that negation right there. The ground is not wet. And now, of course, I can just plug in all of my statements, right? I've got this, go here, it is raining, it's cold, if and only if the ground is wet. Okay. All right. So that's it for our exercises for today. Now, the idea just to keep in mind, right, is just that we're trying to be careful about the order in which these things have been constructed, right? Like that these two statements, for instance, this one and this one, let me bold these two. Right? These are very different. I really should, let me just copy it and bring them down here. So the moral of the story, let me just say, structure matters, right? These are incredibly different statements. One of them is saying, hey, it's not the case that C or D is true. Or, excuse me, it's not the case that C and D is both true at the same time. The other one is saying C is not true and D is not true, right? So these are crucially different. And you can only see that okay. Okay. So that's the idea, right? Like we want to make sure we're being very careful about how we build our sentences, because the way, and not just how we build, it's not as if we're going to be just building sentences in the class. I don't want to mislead you in that way. The idea is that you'll be seeing tons of sentences, right? Mostly in the logic language. Soon after this unit, we're going to be stepping away from English pretty much entirely. And the idea is you're going to be seeing these logical statements, and what you want to be able to do is just like be able to just see the structure itself, right? See that like, okay, the main operator of the left one here, that's a negation. This is a negation statement, and it's gonna matter for how we work with it, how we deal with it, how we try to prove that it's false or that it's true, all that sort of thing. Whereas this one is a conjunction, right? It's saying two things are true, and that's really going to matter for how we try to prove it, how we try to deal with it, how it relates to other things. So the point of all this is just that, right, like we can differentiate between what makes sense and what's just purely gibberish, right? And as we're looking at what makes sense, like part of the sense that it makes, right, part of its meaning is just deeply tied to what is the order of everything, right? Like how were these things constructed? What is the main operator, and what is just right? What are the sub operators? What are the secondary, tertiary, so on operators? Okay, Let me know if you have any questions, and of course, take care.